Well, again, good morning, distinguished guests and heroes of the World War II night fighters. My name is Bill Rial, and I stand before you today on behalf of my late father, Samuel Rial, 417th Night Fighter Squadron, MOS 1058, night fighter pilot, 2-engine. 417th hero Rich Zebart asked if I would tell some of my dad's stories. Unfortunately, I lost my father in June of '63 when I was very young, and I'm afraid I don't have many stories. However, through Dad's military records, his pilot logbook, letters sent to his parents during the war, and through my association with so many of you, I've learned a lot about my father, and I am now able to put a few words on the record for him. According to Dad's official military records, he participated in 45 combat missions over enemy-held Europe. He supervised maintenance of aircraft. He served as a squadron check pilot and numerous other additional duties. And additionally, he was awarded the Air Medal, several theater ribbons with numerous Bronze Stars, and many other decorations. Through Dad's logbook, I learned that he joined the 417th in Corsica in June of '44. He flew the Beaufighter, the P-61, and much to the displeasure of Mr. Paul Peyron, he actually had a few hours in the Squadron B-25, and I'll mention that again later. And he was also with the squadron from Corsica to France, and then he signed out of the squadron from their post in Germany in the September time frame of 1945. From the letters that Dad sent home to Arkansas, I learned that Kissimmee, Florida was just a runway in the woods. I learned that during pilot training he saw a movie titled Lady in the Dark. Later, that title became the name of the famous P-61 that got the last two aerial kills of World War II. I learned that during pilot training he witnessed two of his pilot training buddies become grounded for dogfighting. They were caught diving at cars and houses. Some things never change. I learned that he cracked up a plane in June of 1944, and thanks to my association with the 417th, there's my first story I'd like to tell. I learned from the 417th members that a photo that I had of Dad and his RO holding a nice-looking trophy was in fact a photo of them holding the chromed or polished relief tubes from the damaged bow they cracked up on landing. Thank you, 417th. If not for you, our family might have stared at this photo for many more years, thinking Dad and Willie had received some prestigious trophy. And further from reading his letters, I learned that his tent roommates were Red Wilson, Joe Daines, Stinky Moldrum, Woody Grange, Jameson Pence. And finally, that taking friendly fire from jittery Allied ground gunners was a common event. And now a couple of his stories. The only "there I was" war story I remember hearing from Dad was told one Sunday morning as I was sitting in his lap just prior to our family heading to Sunday school and church. I can tell this story as I, a pilot as well, can stand here today and, for the record, state that there's no pilot who did not become a better pilot by admitting his mistakes and learning from them. Dad, I hate to do this to you, but we all know you became a better pilot from it. My mother and father were talking about Dad's RO often. His name was James Willie or Bill Chelf. I don't remember how the story came up that morning, but I bet it had something to do with Willie. As the story goes, while on patrol one night, he and Willie were engaged by a German fighter. I remember Dad using his hands and describing in great detail how he was doing everything he knew how to shake that German. Dad described the engagement in theatrical detail. Later I learned this was called shooting down your watch. Dad said he was yanking, banking, rolling up and over, but nothing he could do with the airplane would shake the enemy. He was certain they were about to get smoked. That's my term. Dad said he was out of ideas and probably airspeed as well when Willie yelled at him, "Turn off the damn lights." Dad said as soon as he turned off the airplane lights, the German fighter went away. Lesson learned. At that time, that story probably excited me more hearing Dad say a cuss word than learning how to get rid of a bandit. Not long into my military aviation career, this story certainly meant a lot more to me. Although I never did any night air-to-air, I did have fun with my wingmen now and then by turning off my position lights during night formation air work. Yes, Dad, thinking of you. Speaking of Dad's RO, in 1980, I started a project to find military veterans who were stationed with Dad. One of the first names I pursued was Willie Cheff. 17 years later, in 1997, shortly after becoming an honorary member of your NightFighter organization, thank you, Bud Anderson, and thank you, Don Flaherty, I actually found Willie Cheff's nephew, Winston Cheff of Norfolk, Virginia. My repository of Dad's memorabilia grew tremendously after meeting Winston, and we both enjoyed many hours sitting together talking about his uncle and my dad's RO, Bill Cheff. Thank you, Internet, and thank you, Winston. My next story was actually confirmed here at Reading during the NightFighter organization's 1997 reunion. At that reunion, I met Mr. Paul Peyron, the 417th crew chief for the B-25 called Strawberry Roan, and the author of a great book of his personal memoirs with the 417th, C'est la Gier. When Mr. Peyron and I first met, Paul said he did not remember my father. On the second day of the reunion, while going over some of Dad's pilot logbook entries with several men of the 417th, I asked two questions. How was Dad getting any B-25 time? And do you remember this entry on the 26th of September, 1944, where Dad, as the second pilot for the captain, Lieutenant Jack Rabbit Wilson, pranged at Marcinelle? By the way, this was only Dad's third hop in the B-25. Well, one of the gentlemen that I was with hollered over to Mr. Peyron to come look at the Dad's logbook. And remember, Mr. Peyron had already told me that he didn't remember my dad and didn't know my dad. Well, when I pointed out that logbook entry to Mr. Peyron, his eyes got as big as saucers. He stared at the logbook, and then he looked back at me, and then he looked at the other men standing around, and he looked back at the logbook, and then he said, I was there. I was on that flight. I know your dad. I wrote about him in my book. So, there's a lot more to that story, and if you're interested, I'll tell you more about it later or refer you to Mr. Peyron's book. And now my last subject for the record. When I started my project to find out more about Dad, I only had a few photos from his time in the 417th. One of those, which I brought with me today, was of Dad sitting in his P-61 looking out of the cockpit. And in this photo, you can see all but the first letter of my mother's name, Marky, printed on this side of the aircraft. Over the years, I used that photo for a couple of paintings made of Dad's P-61 flying formation with an A-10. These paintings prominently display Marky on the port side of Dad's Black Widow, along with detailed markings of my A-10. Probably 15 years after having the paintings made, I learned a neat story about Dad's plane. Mr. Zebart put Mr. Warren Thompson, the author of the book P-61 Black Widow Units of World War II, in touch with me for any material I might have for his writings. About a year after sending Mr. Thompson a package of photos and logbook entries, etc., I was looking through one of his books at an Air Force museum in Ohio. As I was thumbing through the pages, I found a June 45 photo of Dad's airplane. This photo, made somewhere in Germany, showed the starboard side of the aircraft, that's the other side, proudly displaying my mom's name, Marky. But there was also another name painted on the nose, Hades Lady. I called Mr. Zebart. After telling Mr. Zebart the story, he told me that he remembered Dad's plane, Marky, very well. In fact, he pulled out a book and began reading me the story of how Hades Lady was named by a Northrop aircraft worker who won a war bond drive contest. Thanks to Mr. Zebart, I now have several books that tell the Marky Hades Lady story very well. Well, folks, those are just a couple of stories that I have on behalf of my father, Sam C Rial. I hope you appreciate them as much as I appreciate and cherish the opportunity to share them with you. And before I forget, I must tell you about a meeting that I had just last week with another son of a P-61 pilot. Steve Ike Eisenhower III. Steve's father flew the P-61 Black Betty with his RO, Frankie Bosch, with the 547th NightFighter Squadron in the Pacific. Many of you remember the late Mr. Bosch. He was the executive vice president of the World War II Night Fighters when I was brought on board. Steve sent me some memorabilia to bring on this trip to Reading, and I have it with me. And one of the neatest items in his package is a letter written to his father from the Norfolk test pilot, John Myers. By the way, Ike Eisenhower's brother-in-law, I learned, his name was Wallace Lean, was one of the first P-61 test pilots. Well, anyway, sometime in 1947, Steve's dad, who went by Ike, was ferrying a YP-61 from Florida to Ohio when he crash-landed the aircraft in some farmer's field. Mr. Myers' letter, which I have a copy of here, dated March 20th, 1947, points out to Mr. Eisenhower that he now has the distinction of being involved in the first YP-61 accident. I am so thankful I started this project to find people that knew Dad in the military. I'm so appreciative for all I've learned from many of you. I wish I had started earlier. I wish I had asked more questions and heard the stories that have been locked in memories far too long. Yes, my effort brought me in touch with so many heroes in this night fighter organization. As others have stated, you require no fanfare. You know what you accomplished. You are proud. But remember this, we that follow you will always remember that nothing could ever equal your sacrifices and your achievements. Your duty and honor to the United States of America are the monuments we cherish. What an honor it is for me to be with you today. The gentlemen in this audience and all the men and women of your era, simply put, changed the world. You, the greatest generation, came of age during the Great Depression and the Second World War. Your common values, duty, honor, courage, love of family and your country are the traits that we strive for today. My brother, Samuel Col Rial Jr., also an Air Force veteran, and I offer our salute to you and to all who gave themselves for a safe and free world.